So last time we looked at Kantianism, which says morality is about rationally choosing to do the right thing autonomously, keeping these absolute duties. Today we're going to look at Paul Taylor. So Paul Taylor was an American philosopher in the 20th century. He thought, well, I really like Kantianism because it's about rationality and these absolute duties and respect, and I think there's a lot to that. But it's so bad at dealing with environmental ethics. So if you're a traditional Kantian, you're going to say rational persons have value. Other stuff doesn't. So I don't know, if you were graduating high school and you were like, oh, I've always kind of wanted to torture a bunch of kittens, like just as a fun thing to do, like smoking a cigar. I'm just going to do it once. It's not like it's going to be a habit or it's going to make me into a certain kind of person. I just want to try it one time. Kant would say, well, that's kind of weird, but I guess it's not morally wrong because you're not hurting any rational persons. And Taylor thought, most people would think, that just can't be right. So on the one hand, Taylor really liked Kantianism. On the other, he really liked these environmental and animal concerns, and he wanted to bring them together. How's he going to do that? Well, here's how. He takes what's called a biocentric outlook. He's a biocentrist. He thinks a few things. Step one, this is very Kantian, you should rationally recognize value. Right? So he thinks if you study ecology, you'll see all these organisms depend on each other. None of them is independent. And if you study biology, you'll see they all have abilities that help them, right? So, some of them can fly, some of them can swim, some of them are good at camouflage, some of them are really fast. They all have really cool abilities. So what, we're special because we can reason? No. Reason is just valuable because we're human. It wouldn't help like a termite or a daisy. Daisy wouldn't be improved at all by being rational. It has other abilities that are good for it. So Taylor thought if you studied ecology and biology, you would come away with the recognition of this egalitarianism, that all living things are equally valuable. You can't say, oh, well, a cheetah can run really fast, so that makes it more valuable than an octopus that can camouflage itself. That doesn't make sense. You can't compare across species like that. He thought that each individual organism was what he called a teleological center of life. And what does he mean by that? He means each organism has a good of its own. It can grow and develop in a way that's good for it, that'll help it flourish and be the best it can be, or things can get in the way that'll keep it from living the best life it could. So if you're a plant, you need sunlight and water, good dirt with lots of minerals in it. If you're a fish, you need lots of water to swim and breathe in, and you need certain kinds of food, right? And then we need some kinds of stuff. Lots of animals need to be with other animals. Like we're a social species, most apes are, dogs are, so that can count as something that you need as well. So there's no rational way to rank species with some being more valuable than others. They all count the same. And each individual organism has a good of its own that should be promoted. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with respect for nature, respect for all living things. We recognize, to use a term that's familiar by now, that each living thing, not just persons, each living thing is non-instrumentally valuable. So what rules should we follow? What duties do we have if everything is non-instrumentally valuable? Taylor thought mainly we had a duty not to interfere unless we needed to do it in order to survive or something. So we shouldn't go in and cut down a forest because we'd kill all the trees, we'd kill a lot of the smaller plants below them, we would destroy the habitat of just tons of insects and little animals and stuff. A bunch of them would die. Um, Taylor thinks that would be just a terrible incursion on our part. We'd be exploiting and objectifying all these living things that count for their own sake just as much as we do, right? So our primary duty is not to interfere in that way. And that's for each living thing, right? Not for species. So, like, I actually brought props this time. Like a single penguin, right? It's not just going to be, oh, I've got to protect this species so at least one of them survives, right? No, I've got to protect each of them, because each penguin, just this penguin all by itself, it has some things that are good for it and some things that are bad for it. Certain kinds of food, certain kinds of living space, right? So I've got to honor this particular penguin, not just the whole species. So you can't go in and be like, oh, well, it'll benefit one species if I take out another species. You know, you can't like wipe out predators to save smaller animals, because the predators count just as much. You can't do like a cull where you kill a bunch of the individual organisms to try to promote the whole ecosystem, because each of the individual organisms counts as much as the others. So you can't interfere in the life of any individual living thing in that way, right? That's another reason that it's kind of like Kantianism, right? It's not just about balancing the numbers, it's about respecting each individual. In the same way that Kant thinks, you can't just think what'll produce the most happiness overall, you have to respect each rational person. So what's the problem with that? I've been giving you one big problem with each of the theories, and you might think, well, this sounds pretty good. I don't see what could be wrong with this one. Well, its very absoluteness can be kind of a problem. So, for Kant, for Taylor, there are some things you should just never do, no matter the consequences. And you might think that that just can't be right. I mean, you should never kill someone, ever. You should never torture someone, no matter what. Like, if a bomb has already been planted and the time is ticking away and it's going to blow up in an hour, and you've got the guy who planted the bomb, but he's not talking, you can't go, like, threaten his mom, you know? What if that's the only thing that'll get him to tell you where the bomb is? What if that's the only thing that'll save 1,000 people from this bomb? What if it's the only thing that'll save 1,000,000 people? What if it's the only thing that'll save 100 million people? There's got to be some number where the outcome is going to matter just as much as the rights of the individual. At least that's the objection. That's the problem that people often raise with Kantianism, because it's so strict about things you can never do. Right? It's kind of the opposite of utilitarianism, where the problem was you could sort of stomp all over people's rights to get the outcome you wanted. It turns out to be really difficult to come up with a theory that makes sense and that's coherent and that can deal with both of those problems. We're not going to solve that here. I'm just raising it as something to keep in mind when you think about the theories. So that's Taylor. Next week we're going to look at virtue ethics, which is going to take a pretty different turn. So I'm looking forward to it. Email me if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you soon.